Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have two very special guests with us tonight, and we have Robert Pondiscio, who is one of our No BS besties, and we've had him on before, and we're so happy to have him return. Robert Pondiscio is a senior visiting fellow at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, AEI. He writes and speaks extensively on education and education reform issues with an emphasis on literacy curriculum, civic education, and classroom practice. His 2019 book, How the Other Half Learns, based on a year of observations at New York City's Success Academy network of charter schools, was praised as morally disturbing and unsparingly honest by the New York Times. After 20 years in journalism, including senior positions at Time and Business Week, Robert became a fifth grade teacher at a struggling South Bronx public school in 2002. The rest of his bio will be posted in our show notes. And Annie Morrison, we have here with us today. Welcome, Annie. She is the co-founder and principal consultant of Rivet Education. As co-founder and principal consultant, Annie works with state and local education agencies to develop and execute cohesive academic strategies to scale the use of high-quality instructional materials with a specific focus on the communications needed to execute those strategies well. Most recently, she has been supporting the Delaware, New Mexico, and Maryland Departments of Education with the implementation of HQIM, and that's high-quality instructional materials. Before founding Rivet, Annie served as the director of communications for the Louisiana Department of Education, where she managed and led educator relations for the agency. And again, her full bio will be in the show notes. The article that we will be discussing tonight is Robert's article, and it is entitled Taking Curriculum Implementation Seriously. And I have to say, I love Robert's articles. I'm always following him. Judy and I are big fans. This one in particular really hit home because I am a consultant myself working in schools. And I know that it's not just about getting a program into a school district. It's all about implementation. And he really hit this one out of the park. I'm just going to start off with one quote from his article to just get this started. And he said, "In fact, I've lately struck from my vocabulary the phrase curriculum adoption in favor of curriculum purchases." Robert, that one line in particular was just, I had to ask you about it. So let's get started.
Hey, did that line get you hot?
I'm so
This is, same show, Judy. I need to ask you, Robert, what was on your mind when you had written that?
I mean, well, okay, I always say this, I never want to be that guy who waves the bloody shirt and says, well, unless you've been a teacher, then you don't understand. But come on, this is one of those ones where, those of us who've been in the classroom have a slightly different perspective. We've all been there, right? We've all had that. Here's the new curriculum. Let's unpack it. Let's do a walkthrough. Let's have a day of PD or half a day of PD with, the trainer who, went to a hotel somewhere miles away and, had a 2-day train the trainer. Now she's the expert. So, we just don't set the conditions. And I guess I shouldn't assume people know this. I'm a diehard curriculum guy, right? When I left the classroom, that was my thing. I was going to become, the curriculum evangelist. But come on, those of us who have that perspective are often accused, and frankly, not unfairly, of of letting that idea out into the wild that, oh, just buy this or just adopt this curriculum and all will be well. And we never really think about, or I guess it's fair to say we allow the misimpression to bounce along that it's all about the curriculum and not about the PD, the professional learning, on and on and on. So I don't know how that idea occurred to me, but I'm earnest about it, Faith. Like I really have disciplined myself to stop saying curriculum adoption. It's like, you mean purchase, right? Because that's what it is. Like it's not just that's the starting line. It's not the finish line.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's exactly what it is. It is a program. And, the marketers certainly want school districts buying it. That's their end game, to buy it. But school district personnel needs to know that they have a role to really know and understand what the curriculum should look like. So I'm going to bring Annie in. So Annie, you are a consultant. You started Rivet. And tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with the Mount Horeb School District, because that's the school district Robert mentioned in the article. So we would love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as you mentioned in my bio, Rivet works mostly with state departments of education to help them scale the use of high quality instruction materials and, more importantly, curriculum-based professional learning, right? It's not an either or, it's both. And this really stems from the work that we did in Louisiana. We were the first state to review curricula ourselves and rate them. Initially when we put out our initial list, we had 80% of our districts across the state adopting high quality materials. But then a year later, we're going into classrooms and those teachers weren't using those materials like we thought they were. And when we started digging and probing, we realized that these teachers did not receive the training that they needed on how to use these materials effectively. And the reality is they require a fundamental shift in teacher practice and how students engage in classrooms for the better, right? But it's not how teachers were taught in teacher prep programs. It's not how they were taught in their own classrooms, right? It's a major shift. And as Robert says, to expect them just to know how to use these new materials, it's like giving a new surgeon a new robot to do surgery for them and saying like, here, unpack it. Good luck, right? We would never do that to them. But we are expecting teachers to do this. And so we work with states. And so Wisconsin was a state that we are working in. And so Mount Horeb is a district in southern Wisconsin. And so they mentioned to us that this is a district that has been partnering in Wisconsin. They have like their regional support centers. They call them CSAs. So they're regional service centers that support districts across the state. And their regional support center was really investing in supporting their school districts and using high quality instruction materials. So the Department of Education there was like, you all need to go check out what's happening in Mount Horeb. They're doing some really great work with their CSA. And so we went in and observed. I spent 3 days in the district that first visit, and they had just newly adopted Bridges in mathematics. And right out of the gate, I knew something was new and special there. Because of COVID, they had actually modified their launch plan. They could not rely on that traditional like workshops that, a lot of districts do rely on. And they couldn't take teachers out of the classrooms to do more workshops during the year because substitutes were not available. So they had to rethink their model and really zeroed in on job embedded professional learning through coaching and classroom observations, modeling, co-teaching with the use of their CSA to give teachers that ongoing support. They did a lot of work up front to really help teachers understand why a change in math instruction was needed. Then they adopted Bridges. And then they did some really intense training with their teachers to prepare them for day one. But then they just didn't wash their hands of them and let them go and hope for the best. Those teachers on a weekly basis had collaborative planning time. They had opportunities to either be observed by a CSA 2 coach or actually the other teachers in their grade level. So they would, the teachers in their grade level would come and observe a lead teacher teaching a lesson. and they would be pacing a day behind. So that lead teacher would kind of model with CISA 2 what that lesson should look like. They would debrief. Those teachers would discuss how they would need to make some adjustments to their own plan for the day. And then they would go and teach that lesson the next day with that model in place. And so they just provided teachers with a lot of ongoing support in a way that you don't often see.
Well, that's very interesting because that's exactly what I've done with Reading First years ago. That was the model where we would get trained and then we would have to go in and provide professional development. But it wasn't just a one and done. It was sustained support where it was embedded modeling, embedded training, and then there was a cycle of coaching. My co-host Judy Boxner is a coach in New York City. I'm getting tongue-tied with everything, but she's a coach and she does this type of work. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy. Judy, do you do some of the things that Annie mentioned as far as the modeling, going in, having teachers observe, having conversations, feedback, where there's this cycle of coaching going on continuously?
So I've had the privilege of working on the Universal Literacy team years back in New York City, which was one of the most powerful teams in New York City. It's actually a damn shame that that team got dismantled, to be quite honest. That's where I was really trained to be, go from being an educator just in the classroom or as a reading specialist to working with teachers. So that was an intense training process. I learned what does it mean to be a coach? What does it mean to side-by-side teach versus co-teach versus debriefing versus co-planning? Now, the truth of the matter is that all those elements take time. That means an administrator has to really clearly understand what each phase of the coaching cycle looks like and what its purpose is. And that's not always that easy in New York City schools or in schools in general, because there's after COVID, I'm seeing a lot more teacher absences in general citywide. I don't know why. And it just takes a lot of coordination. You have to really think about your literacy block or your math block and how you're allocating time. Is there time for common planning in this built into the schedules? I think that the whole topic of implementation science is such an important one, but I don't think it's thought about enough. And I think that, it sounds like, the organization that Annie works for really knows their stuff, but we've had people come in from publishing companies and they didn't seem that knowledgeable and they didn't seem like they had years in the system or working in schools. And it seemed like some of the people that we met, across our path that, were coaching us for short periods of time didn't know as well as my own teachers. So buy-in was impacted immediately because they were like, wait a minute, does this teacher or does this person that just came in even know how to teach? And I think that the other piece of it is thinking about the data. How much are we also looking at, implementation, but also at student outcomes? And I think that very often we don't look at data enough. Schools are collecting so much data and not looking at it enough. So that's part of the system instructors that have to be in place as well. It's a really tough time right now in education. A lot of data is pouring in and, I'm sitting at my desk and I'm watching it and I'm thinking, did I, do all that I can to make sure that I'm seeing the shifts that I want? And, year one of implementation, sometimes you might not get exactly the results that you were hoping for. Yes, I see shifts, but I want people to really walk away understanding that implementation and doing it well takes some time. People have to be open-minded to new learning, but we also have to not accept everything that's in a box and think it's going to be perfect. It's still going to require thought and understanding of the content being taught. And I think that that's a really important piece of it. And I also want to say, I don't think all programs were created equally. There's some that have more data to support that they're stronger than others too, right? And Robert, you probably know that. I know you're a big fan of CKLA. However, that was
Yeah,
the one that was
well,
on New York
it's a
City.
bias. I worked for, I mean, I kind of discovered E.D. Hirsch and core knowledge on my own as a classroom teacher, and kind of devoted myself to it when I left the class, so much so that I actually ended up working for the Core Knowledge Foundation for a time. More on that in a moment. But okay, I know I'm not supposed to be the one asking the questions here, but I do earnestly have questions for both Annie and Judy, since you kind of said the magic word, which is buy-in. So without naming names, I was talking within the last couple of days with some school board members who are undergoing or going through an ELA adoption. And, one of the ones that they are considering is CKLA, so, no, pretty clear what my bias is. But that said, we were talking about how do you get teachers involved? And again, without naming names, and I'm not going to throw anybody's program under the bus, but one of the contenders is a program that is just, frankly, not as good as not just CKLA, but one or two of the others that they're considering. And when I brought this up, one of the school board members said to me something to the effect of, well, you got to make sure that the teachers are enthusiastic about it. And yes, I understand that. I mean, I've said for years, I'd rather my daughter be in a classroom with a teacher who's devoted to a curriculum that I don't like than being forced at gunpoint to do one that I do like. But before you can do the implementation, you got to get the teachers bought in, right? So, can either Annie or Judy, I just love to hear you talk about your experience a little bit. What have you had that situation where, like, look, I know this is a good program, I know it works, I'll have you talk to folks who believe in it, but you still get some resistance, right? I mean, what's the strategy for overcoming that and just getting that first step, the buy-in before the implementation?
I just, by the way, had this conversation. I did an all-day workshop with administrators at Nassau BOCES, which I think, Annie, is kind of what you were talking about. It's a regional support system for local school districts. And just to tell you, that was one of the things I talked about, Robert, buy-in. Okay. And when I was talking about implementation, I said you have to be like a salesperson almost. How do you sell this to the people in your building? So I know Robert wanted to hear from Judy and Annie, but when you said that, I was like, that's exactly what we were talking about, buy-in. I could tell you from what I've done, I always start with something that is not subjective and not trying to push anything. It's really finding common ground first, such as what learning is. What does learning mean? And now, what do you know about your subject area, and how does it fit into this science of learning? So it's kind of like presenting information that is not pushing anyone in any direction, but it's this kind of leveling the playing field and trying to start from that point. But I'd love to hear what both of you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to hear what Annie has to say, because, maybe we kind of buried the lead here, but, Rivet produced this case study. That's what I was writing about, this case study of a math adoption in Mount Horeb in Wisconsin. But I mean, I'm not sure I remember that piece of it, Annie. Was there some discussion about, because if I'm not mistaken, this district, it was not like they were terrible at math. They were pretty good, but they recognized that they could grow. One, the hardest thing I think to get teachers to do is change their practice. Two, it's even harder when things are not terrible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they had a new math director that came into the district, and when she started observing classrooms, she was noticing that students weren't really, like, the shifts weren't present in the classroom. Students weren't really, like, developing that deep conceptual learning of math. They weren't wrestling with, like, complex math tasks. But again, like you said, Robert, like, things were going okay. Like, they were moderately proficient district. But when she started talking with her teachers, they too were like, we want more out of our children. Like, we know that they're capable of more. And when I think of buy-in, I think it is starting with that, like, a very clear and coherent academic vision. So when you walk into math classrooms, what do you want to see as a district leader, as a school leader, as a teacher? And having teachers at the table, first and foremost, to establish that vision, right, is critical, right? And that should happen long before you even start the adoption process, right? That is like the foundational piece that you are like going through the entire review process and working against. And so having teachers help the district establish that vision so that they know it's part of like what they want to be true for their kids. And then you're reviewing materials against that vision, because not all materials are created equal. Ed Reports really does create that floor, right? It's not the ceiling, it's the floor. And so it's important that they are like informed consumers of those reports and then figure out, based on our vision, which of these materials are best suited for our kids and our teachers. And teachers, again, should have a voice there. I think piloting is really important to buy in, right? Like having teachers test different materials, right? And compare, because just because a material like a curriculum is really good on paper, it may be hard to implement and it may not work with the systems and constructs of your district. And that matters, right?
Cheers, Annie. Cheers.
Okay. Great. So I think all of that matters, like that investing teachers all the way through the process. Then when you actually give them the materials, they can trust its why, right? They trust its design and its approach because they've been invested in, and their voice has been invested in since the beginning.
But that's
No,
not
that
how the
makes sense.
rollout, unfortunately, went. I'm sorry, Robert.
No, I was just going to say
You can go.
that makes a lot of sense to me. But what I feel like I saw in this district, what I fear is going to happen is they're going to choose a less than, because they're not willing to, because maybe they're not involving teachers. I simply don't have the insight to say. But it feels to me like they're, at least based on this one conversation with the school board members, it feels like they're just kind of like, we're just going to take the path of least resistance, and whatever they want is fine. And look, if we've learned nothing else in the last couple of years, the experts are not always the experts, right? Like, we've all heard Emily Hanford and sold a story, and how, we've had years and years of bad practice and bad curriculum, but teachers like it and students like it. Well, sometimes you have to, to Annie's point, set a floor and proceed from there.
I think that, what Annie said was so on target, because I do think the conversations need to start well before choosing a program. And again, it's educating people about what's out there, why this is even a discussion. And I know that Judy was saying the rollout in New York City was
teachers were not given a lot of a choice. Basically, districts were given some choices. The city had 3 choices on the table. I don't know how much teachers were involved. I certainly wasn't involved. And, that's very hard when people are told this is what's going to happen, and teachers didn't have a lot of voice. And it was kind of just like, this is what's happening. And I think initially we were all really excited because a lot of the schools that I was actually working at had no curriculum, and that's a disaster too. That's an
Judy,
absolute...
are you referring to the current New York City rollout of is it bookworms, into reading, and the third one? Is that are you referring to the current literacy
the ones
initiative?
that they rolled out in New York City are expeditionary learning, wit and wisdom in some schools, but a majority of the schools that I'm seeing are adopting into reading.
Okay, so
and I
you're
think,
talking about... Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
those were basically the 3 things on the table. And I know Foundations was also for phonics, or some schools have PAF, and I think I see a little bit of really great reading as well. A lot of schools using Hegarty. I think overall teachers are excited that, there's some systems and structures being set. But I think, for a very long time in a lot of schools, we were following the model of balanced literacy. And a lot of our trust in the system in general was broken because whatever we were doing for a very long time was not servicing students well. That in the city was pretty crappy for a very long time. And that doesn't mean that everything that we did during the balanced literacy era was terrible, because a lot of it was fantastic. I was trained in reading recovery, and there were many things that did align closely to the science. However, there were some fundamental flaws, and I think people are very cautious right now. Teachers don't want to get it wrong again. They don't want to be sold another story. They want to know that whatever's being, implemented is actually going to help kids. And, it's hard because, how many years have some of these programs been field tested? When you go online and you look at how many years some of the programs have been in the school systems, do they have a lot of evidence behind them? Do they have years of research to say, oh, this is working with, certain demographics of kids? I don't know. That's not my role, but I think buy-in is hard. And I think the greatest way to get buy-in from teachers is to all be on the same playing field in terms of wanting the same outcomes. We all want kids to learn how to do math well and also to read. And I think that once teachers know what it means to teach somebody to be a learner and to learn well, and teachers learn what explicit instruction looks like, whether it be in math and social studies and science, in teaching kids how to read, that helps, because there's definitely a learning curve with implementation, rollout. The city could say, oh, we're going to give schools help, and you're in phase 1 and you're in phase 2. That's all great, but what does that really mean? How much attention are these schools going to actually get? Are they going to see somebody that comes into the building once a week, once a month? Is that person going to roll up their sleeves and get dirty and actually start modeling lessons? Or are they just going to say, oh, here's your checklist. This is what you need to do. This is what you did well. This is what you didn't do well. Have a great day. Adios, amigo.
Can I ask, and at the risk of diverting this conversation in a completely different direction, I'm broadly supportive from a distance. You're in the system.
Robert, you're pretty fun tonight. You're pretty fun tonight.
Okay.
I like that. You're having a good time.
I am broadly supportive of what New York City is trying to do with the new literacy initiative. And full disclosure, I became a curriculum advocate because I think I was so scandalized by, Lucy Calkins and balanced literacy and what clearly was not working for my fifth graders in the South Bronx. So this is going to sound completely contradictory because sure, teachers should buy in and whatnot, but isn't there some value in just stopping doing what's not working? In other words, okay, nobody probably wants to have a curriculum imposed upon them, but for pity's sake, I mean, New York City has been doing it, doing an injustice to children for a quarter century or more. So just, the old thing about, when you stop hitting your head against the wall, it feels so good when you stop. Well, surely it must feel good to stop doing some of that stuff, even if they didn't.
It sure as hell feels great. Cheers.
Okay.
Again, this is so funny because another point that you just brought up was the whole idea of decluttering, right? Just get rid of what doesn't work before you start adding in. Get rid of what doesn't work. That's one of the first things you have to figure out with your team. What is it that is just not working, and we shouldn't have this? Because as you see, there's a lot of adding in stuff. As Judy was saying, there could be Hegarty, there could be, Foundation. She mentioned, again, I'm not big on naming programs here, but the point is there's a lot of stuff. And
there's a smorgasbord.
And some of it is just okay, and some of it doesn't have to be for everybody. So I think that's one of the first things to do. In Robert's article, Annie, he mentioned, let me just get this. He said, this involves multiple phases, which Rivet categorizes as exploration, program installation, initial implementation, consistent implementation, and innovation and sustainability. So I know there are these different phases, but I would love for you to share from your point of view, because all that makes a lot of sense to me. But again, I don't think it's happening in a lot of places.
Yeah. So what he's referring to is when we recently released a instructional materials implementation tool that maps out those stages. And this is grounded in implementation science. So Judy, I know you were mentioning that earlier. This is modifying NERN's work around implementation science. And we did this because, again, I think just this is so new to everyone, right? This entire process is new to everyone. And we felt that it was just so essential that people understand that this truly is a journey. This is a multi-year marathon, not a 2-day workshop sprint. And that it was important to highlight what are those key actions that district leaders, school leaders, and teachers should be taking in each stage of that journey. And so those are the 5 phases that we've mapped out. And again, in each and every single one of those, and it's funny that you all are talking about just like removing the old materials in program installation. Literally one of the key actions is like, go around and take the old stuff out of classrooms, right? Like you can't implement a new curriculum and like expect that the old materials are still in classrooms and that teachers are going to use this new stuff automatically. And so, yeah, so those are the, that's the journey that we've mapped out. And again, we hope that this tool has been helpful. We've had almost 10,000 visits to this new implementation tool. So we do think that this roadmap is becoming really helpful to folks and helping them to not only like see what the journey is and what to expect and to manage people's expectations, right? That you're not all of a sudden going to be achieving miracles overnight, but also to assess those that are knee deep in the work, right? Just because you're 3 years into the journey doesn't necessarily mean that you're already in that consistent implementation phase. You may use our tool and it has a quick assessment and you might realize that you're still in initial implementation. I did this with a state leader the other day, and I won't name names. They're deep multi-years into this. And when she assessed her districts as a whole, she realized that they're really still in initial implementation. There are some fundamental things that were happening at the principal level that wasn't happening. And so they had not, they were.
Do you have a tool for that? You said that they realized that they had the initial implementation. Do you have a tool for that?
Yes. So our implementation tool has an assessment within it that you can assess which stage you're in and rate like where you are. That looks at like, again, it looks at the district actions, the school actions, and the teacher actions, and you rate those actions red, yellow, or green so that you can then assess which true phase you're in.
That's very interesting, right, Faith? Faith, you're muted.
I think that, you know, any type of implementation work involves this cycle, a lot of conversation, understanding where you are. And quite honestly, just like when you teach, I think the hardest is the beginning and then the end. Somehow the middle, people get into a pattern of doing, but getting to the point of refining what you have and being able to look at it and say, all right, now we were in the box. Maybe it's time we can move a little bit out of the box. But a lot of times these implementations start with out of the box and they didn't even learn the program well. So I think that happens a lot where people who do not get trained well start trying to figure it out for themselves rather than doing it properly. And then it's kind of backwards, you know, where I think a proper implementation would be you learn the program well, and then you're able to branch out and really understand what you have. And that's the sustainability part. That's always the hardest. In reading first, we never really got to sustainability. We were on that road, and then I feel it stopped too soon, unfortunately, and it wasn't getting noticed for all the work.
But you know what, you know, if I could just jump in. So you know what? So this sounds great. I'm dying to see this tool, Annie. This tool could be used for any program, like it. So you work with multiple programs, not just this math program that we're mentioning today, right? You
No,
help with
Yeah, and district Rivet, we don't work directly with districts on curriculum implementation. So we actually have our professional learning partner guide. So we have like the ed reports, but for PL. So we have an online website that vets professional learning organizations. So they are the ones actually doing the day-to-day work with school districts. So our tool that we created is to be used by districts, PL providers, whoever, and it's curriculum agnostic, and that's intentional. So that a
sounds
district, if
great.
you're using HQIM in ELA, you're using HQIM in math, you're using HQIM in science, this tool can be used to measure your implementation in any content area, regardless of the curriculum that you're using.
And I think that's great. But I think it's schools realizing what tool should I use, because I think that a lot of tools are coming out. Like the Reading League just came out with a tool to evaluate are you using a quality program. Everybody was very excited about it. I don't know if everybody's doing that right now, right? Things are exciting for about a day and another day, and then you see that there's a version that a report card's been done, so you're like, okay, should my team do this? Is this the best use of our time? I think what you're talking about is something really interesting, and I think it's important to think about what's a priority. Like with so many tools coming down the pipeline and so many things, I think what you're mentioning sounds like something that's really important to use once you're unrolling a program. What do you think, Faith or Robert?
Toward that end, what I feel like I've seen a lot of over the years, and remind me, I'll tell you a war story about it from my core knowledge days, is giving up on programs too soon. In other words, somebody, we want that immediate sugar rush. Oh, I adopted on Monday, and by Friday, I'm seeing results. Well, that just isn't the way any of this works. And I think that, Annie, tell me if you see something different, but I feel like that drives a lot of churn. And also, I would joke that district superintendents don't buy green bananas because you're not going to be in that job for very long. And every time there's a new one, then that person comes in and wants to adopt a new curriculum. So we tend to accept a lot of churn in not just personnel, but in curriculum. And it takes time, right? But the system is almost set up against it. It's really, really hard. It's like we have the attention span of a gnat in this work. We just don't stick with things.
Well, and I think in large part, again, is of no fault their own, we're underestimating, again, what these materials actually take to be used skillfully. And we're not thinking of things like systems and structures. A school schedule can make or break the best curriculum. If you are forcing what is required of a 90-minute ELA block into 60 minutes or 45 minutes, you are not going to reap the full benefits of that curriculum, right? If you don't have time for teachers to collaborate and meet at least weekly, right? Ideally to, digest units and lessons and rehearse and practice and look at student work, again, you're not going to reap the full benefits. And so these types of things are what create staying power with these curricula that can transcend leadership changes. It was one of the things when we were at the LDOE that Superintendent White always said. He was like, we are trying to change the systems, right? We are trying to create a set of informed consumers and the systems that support those consumers, that regardless of who is sitting in the DOE, that this work will continue. Like that was our goal. And same thing at Rivet. Like we're trying to help districts really create those systems and structures that allow them to really accelerate change and to maximize the full benefit of these curriculum. In addition to like the proper training. We haven't talked a lot about just the importance of like curriculum-based professional learning and that just like ongoing support that teachers and leaders. I think another reason things fall apart is because the leaders are not brought in from day one in that initial launch training. They're not sitting beside their teachers and learning the ins and outs of these curriculum themselves. So when their teachers come to them and they're struggling, the principal's like, I don't know, go back to using what you were using, right? Like, I don't care.
So they're the ones who have to observe the teachers. If they don't understand this deeply and they don't understand whatever the content is and how to administer this program deeply, how are they going to observe? They're going to be looking for different things. If they don't know, maybe they're looking for strategies that have been debunked. We don't know. So you really have to get the leaders on board and get them trained immediately. Robert, I want to pull out a quote from your article, another one. And I thought this was kind of spicy. It was, over the years, I've also crossed swords occasionally with fellow curriculum advocates who labor under the misconception, or allow others to do so, that simply adopting high quality instructional materials, HQIM, is a magic bullet, or who obsess over minor points of orthodoxy between programs. The larger battle to be fought and won is making curriculum, virtually any decent curriculum, central to school improvement efforts. So let's talk about that. So I know we're on social media.
I don't want to burn any bridges.
Well, you know what? I want to know what you're talking about. You.
Okay, let me see how I can say this without saying more than I should. There are folks. There are folks in this space. I will not. I'm a nice boy, Faith. I don't name names. But there are folks in this space who I think, I don't want to say they play fast and loose, but they do fetishize minute differences between knowledge-rich ELA curriculum, which is kind of, where I live and breathe. And I always feel the need to remind these folks, like, have you spent any time in the classroom seeing how these things are implemented? In other words, if you have this idea that teachers, slavishly adopt or teach these curricula as written, that world does not exist, because, curriculum, as I've said for years, is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of education. By the way, as a way into this, Faith, at the start of this conversation, you were talking about curriculum developers or publishers, being content to just sell this stuff and then their job is done. Well, I respectfully, I have to disagree, because if that's true, then they're cutting their own throats. And what I mean by that is, that's how you get a reputation for, well, this doesn't work. So when I was working for the Core Knowledge Foundation years ago, Engage New York, this giant lesson site. Well, CKLA, I don't even think it was called CKLA back then, but Core Knowledge was basically the 3rd through 5th grade ELA portion of Engage New York. I live in Albany County, so I remember going to the train the trainers at the Holiday Inn in Albany 10 years ago or so, and listening to the New York State trainers telling the folks in the districts, encouraging them, I'll never forget this phrase, well, you can adapt or adopt this. Annie said before, when there's friction, the soup say, well, we'll just go back to doing what you're comfortable with. So that mindset of just, adapt or adopt. And I remember taking this person aside and say, adopt or don't adopt. Because, and this was just self-interest on my part. In other words, because what happens otherwise? You go back to your district, you sample, you dabble in it a little bit. A lesson doesn't go well. You say, oh, we tried that, it didn't work. Well, you didn't try it. So this gets back to my point about buy-in. I would much rather have a school or district enthusiastically embracing, however, whether it's getting teachers involved in the beginning or what, but the idea that we can just kind of, sample and try it out a little bit, nibble a little bit about the edges, and that's going to be enough to tell us whether or not this works. That's in nobody's interest. It doesn't work for kids, and it definitely doesn't work for publishers, by the way. If you're a publisher, you don't want that. Like, I want that buy-in. I want full results of your implementing it well, because otherwise the word gets around, oh, that didn't work. Well, how do you know? You didn't really try it.
But here's the issue, Robert. Judy said there are people who go in from the publishing company, the publishing rep, and you know what? They might know the program, but they might not be expert practitioners. Maybe they haven't had teachers for very long, and they jump into these marketing roles, and ultimately they know the program well enough to keep it going, but they don't know teaching deeply. That's the problem.
That's fine, Faith. And I'm not going to argue the point too strenuously. I'm merely suggesting that if there are folks who are content to just make the sale and see you later, well, then ultimately there's a price to be paid for that.
I would
agree. Faith, and I think that, you know, I have to give the Reading Leaks some kudos, because I think that, you know, some portions of programs didn't get a high score, and now, you know, it's public. So now they have an incentive, you know, it's public, we're going to make it better. And I think that that's actually a cool tool, because maybe it will hold people accountable for improving programs. Because I think, you know, us as consumers and as classroom educators, we do want to hold people more accountable. We do want to see good results. And I think that, you know, it's way more than just saying we want rigorous instruction, because I hear that word rigor. It's also about outcomes, and we're going to monitor the outcomes. And are we getting the results that we want? You know, year one, maybe not. Year two, we're going to want to start seeing that needle shift more. Year three, even more. So I think it's really important to look at what student products are students producing. What did the pedagogy that the teacher, you know, implemented? What is their craft strong? And if not, what additional training is that teacher going to get, not only to understand the program better, but to really keep abreast of what the science of reading is really all about? It doesn't have to always mean going for a 2-year letters training. I'm in letters training. I'm in year 2, but there's other ways to learn more efficiently and quickly as well. And Annie, I want to see your tool. So is it available to the public?
Yes, it is. You can find it on our website, www.riveteducation.org. And it's a free tool. It's freely available on our website, and I can share the link if you guys want to put it in the notes for today's session. Yeah, it's freely available.
Absolutely. That would be great. So let's wrap up. Are there any last thoughts that maybe we didn't hit upon? I think we could all agree that buy-in is very important. I think we could all agree that we can't just do a one and done workshop, that there needs to be some committed work along the way, where there's sustained training and feedback and reflection along the way. And as you said, Annie, it's multi-year. This is a multi-year commitment. It can't just be where, as Robert said, it's a purchase and that's it. If we're really serious about curriculum, and it has to go beyond just buying a program, it has to be really understanding what is it that you want to get out of this, whether it's math or ELA, it doesn't really matter. And that's also why we're talking about this, because the subject really is insignificant. Robert really was writing about implementation, and that's why we're discussing that today. So any last words from either one of you that we didn't cover?
I would say that, so my colleague, Robin McClellan, she wrote a blog about there being this no shame zone in professional learning. And I think that is also just so important to underscore here, that, again, these materials are new, and it's okay to recognize that the expertise needed to initially implement and sustain them long-term might not be in your district right now. And that is okay. It's the reason we stood up the Professional Learning Partner Guide, to point to certified providers who, like, you know, that can be consultants, one-off consultants like yourselves, or larger organizations that can come in and not only are an expert in your new curriculum, but have also experienced implementation, and they know how to help you avoid a lot of these roadblocks so that you can accelerate change. I think one of the reasons Mount Horeb in less than 3 years has seen a 13% increase in math proficiency in their district is because they had CISA 2 with them every single step of the way to guide them. And so I would say that there's just like real value in having an outside expert support you and be that little shoulder partner throughout this process that has been through it, right? They have the bruises, they have the wounds, they've done it, right? They have those battle scars, and they can really help you.
I guess my final thought on this is, you know, I talked about buy-in earlier to curriculum programs. maybe the elephant in the room here is that we have to drive buy-in among the very notion that curriculum can make a difference, right? I mean, Judy, you said before that, and I've been there too. You know, you go to schools where there is functionally no curriculum at all. You know, right? There's just nothing, and teachers are always, you know, cobbling together stuff from the internet or whatnot. And we tell them, we flatter them like, yo, you're the best person to know what every child needs. And the upshot of that is we make the job just too damn hard. I've said this for years. Like we've made teaching too hard for mere mortals. And that's who we have in classrooms. It's not saints and superstars. It's just folks. We got to make the job doable by those folks, because, you know, that's who we have and that's all we're ever going to have. So part of that, to my mind, is just elevating curriculum's place in the work, right? We shouldn't be asking teachers to be both the curriculum designer and curriculum deliverer. You know, either one of those jobs is hard. To do them both at an expert level is damn near impossible. So, you know, before we even get to the conversation about how do we drive buy-in of quality programs, how do we drive buy-in to the idea that that there should be a curriculum, it should be coherent, and this gets beyond math, obviously, Annie. This is more, you know, the whole broad sweep of the student experience. You know, just normalizing that idea that, you know, that we in this school, in this district, we build a coherent student experience around curriculum, and here it is. There's got to be agreement for that principle before you can negotiate and get teacher buy-in as to what the individual component parts should be.
Judy, any last thoughts?
I think Rivet hit it on the money again. It's just the teaching profession in general is it's become very hard, and I see that a lot of teachers are at wit's end because even with curriculum and program adoption, there's so much planning that the teachers have to do, and they want to do it, but it's just very overwhelming. Sometimes I think, should they start departmentalizing in first grade? This is your reading teacher. This is your math teacher. I think that we have to start thinking a little bit outside the box because teachers are extremely overwhelmed. There's so much planning that they're doing. They give up their entire weekends still. They're planning at night. They're planning in the morning. They're planning during their preps. So I think that curriculum will help. I think we still need to keep that professional training going. But I think we also have to give our teachers some grace. And I think it's very stressful because at the end of the day, you know, these evaluation systems where teachers are evaluated doesn't really have a lot of room for a learning curve. So please, administrators, if your teachers are giving it their best shot, please be kind, be honest with them, but also realize that there's a learning curve and you don't want to break all these teachers because there's a teacher shortage out there. There's really a teacher shortage. And we want our teachers to show up, but we also want them to be happy. We want them to thrive, and we want them to do what's best for kids. So let's support our teachers and let's give them the tools that they need to be successful.
Okay.
And I just want to say that just what you said, Judy, as far as supporting the teachers, when they're learning a new program, it's okay to have the curriculum manual by you. It's okay to look at it and really that they're learning, and you know, to expect them to know this immediately. I know that there are administrators who want to see something happen, like they should just know this already without even having a manual by them. No, they have to be allowed.
We might have to fight about that on another episodes. I kind of don't like manuals out sometimes. I'm going to be honest. So maybe we'll have to
at the beginning when they're first learning.
As long as there's really some level of planning. I don't like when teachers just have a manual out. It's my pet peeve, actually. But we could talk about that in another episode. Sorry.
I look forward to that episode.
Yeah, well, I have to say that I don't know. Anything that you're learning takes some time to learn. And I think that I'm not saying by the end of the year they should be looking at a manual and reciting the lines. But at the beginning, if they need the script to help them to learn, I don't
A lot
understand.
of these programs are not a script. A lot of these programs are written in a way that it's just a guide, and the
I'm
teacher
using
still
the
has.
term script
So we're,
loosely.
so we're, we're having that episode now, it sounds.
Well, all right.
Robert, I know you said you had to go soon, so
I was going to say,
Alright.
buckle in, Robert. You're not leaving like you thought.
All right, there's going to be a part 2 to this. Judy, go ahead. Tell everyone how they could get in touch with us.
Wow, that was really fun. Annie, thank you so much for being with us. Robert, you're
Thanks so
always
much for having me.
a freaking blast to be with. Faith, I love you too, even when we disagree sometimes. Anyway,
the BS button. Sorry.
oh, this is going to be continued, Faith. This one, I won't go down without a little fight. Anyway, follow us on literacyview.com. That's our website. Follow us on Facebook. Join our group, Real Teachers Letting Loose, the Literacy View. Follow us on our YouTube channel. Subscribe, share. Where else, Faith? On Twitter. Faith's active on Twitter at High Five Literacy. And you could find me at Boxner Judy. Faith, did I forget anything?
Apparently outside the parking lot as soon as this is over.
You see, you don't have your script in front of you, so you're asking me if you forgot.
Oh, this episode is so over right now.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Bye.
y'all.